Beneath the Bindings, the curious case of Madame Beaufort. In the meticulous records of the Toulouse Ecclesiastical Court of 1437, no trial better illustrates how female pleasure itself became evidence of demonic conspiracy than that of Isabelle Beaufort. What began as a private marital dispute transformed into the most extensively documented case of carnal witchcraft in medieval French history. A prosecution built not on claims of murdered livestock or blighted crops, but on a husband's disturbing testimony that his wife had become unnaturally responsive to physical touch and experienced ecstasies inconsistent with proper feminine virtue. The resulting testimony provides a rare window into how the medieval church weaponized female sexuality itself as proof of infernal corruption. Dr. Madeleine Rousseau, Pleasure as Transgression. The Criminalization of Female Ecstasy in Medieval Jurisprudence, 2019. The Accused. Isabelle Beaufort occupied an unusual position in 15th century Toulouse society. At 28, she was neither maiden nor crone, but a woman in her prime, married for 9 years to Claude Beaufort, a prosperous wool merchant 22 years her senior. Court documents describe her with uncomfortable precision as uncommonly vivid in complexion and movement, possessing a vitality that draws the eye in a manner both pleasing and disquieting. Unlike most accused witches of the era, typically impoverished elderly women living on society's margins, Isabelle moved in respectable circles, managed portions of her husband's business affairs during his frequent trading journeys, and participated actively in cathedral life. She was known for her skilled herbalism, providing remedies for women's ailments that local physicians could not effectively address. What precipitated her arrest in autumn 1437 was not the typical pattern of community suspicion, but something far more intimate. Her husband's disturbing petition to ecclesiastical authorities, claiming that his wife had become possessed of unnatural appetites and responses following his return from a 3-month trading expedition to Lyon. The accusation. Claude Beaufort's initial complaint, preserved in court records, reveals layers of marital dynamics rarely documented in historical records. Upon my return from trade affairs in Lyon, I found my wife transformed in her physical nature. Where once she was properly modest in marital relations, she now exhibits responses to touch that no virtuous woman should experience. She arches toward contact rather than bearing it with appropriate submission, makes sounds unbefitting a Christian wife, and worst of all, experiences visible tremors of pleasure that continue beyond the proper conclusion of the marital act. When questioned about these changes, she claims only to have discovered the true purpose of her body's design through private contemplation. I fear some malign influence has corrupted her understanding of womanly duty and implanted these unseemly appetites. What might have remained a private matter became a formal accusation when Claude reported discovering evidence of unholy practices in their home during his wife's absence at market. Specifically, a small leather-bound journal containing what he described as instructions for inducing unholy pleasure through unnatural manipulation of the body's secret places. Most damning was his claim that he had observed Isabelle bathing in rosewater under a full moon, touching herself in ways reserved exclusively for procreative purpose within marriage, while whispering words in no Christian tongue. The investigation. The investigation that followed was unusual in its focus and thoroughness. Rather than the cursory examination typical of witch trials involving impoverished defendants, Isabelle's case warranted attention from both medical and theological authorities due to her social position and the unusual nature of the accusations. Father Laurent Devereux, the examining priest, conducted extensive private interviews with both husband and wife. His notes reveal a cleric struggling to maintain professional distance while documenting intimate details. The accused speaks with troubling candor about matters of the flesh. When questioned regarding her husband's claims, she neither denies the physical responses described nor shows appropriate shame for such immodest manifestations. Most concerning is her insistence that such pleasure is not demonic, but divine in origin. She claims, with disturbing conviction, that God would not have created women's bodies with capacity for such exquisite sensation if He did not intend for it to be experienced. Such reasoning represents dangerous misinterpretation of divine purpose, possibly implanted through external influence. The investigation took a more ominous turn when the authorities located and translated portions of Isabel's private journal. The court records describe it as containing detailed anatomical observations of the female form, including mappings of areas that produce particular sensations when touched in specific ways. More troubling are descriptions of techniques for breath control and muscle contraction that allegedly intensify these sensations to ecstatic heights. Interspersed among these carnal instructions are what appear to be prayers, but addressed not to any recognized saint or to the Holy Mother, but to she who knows the body's true purpose and the Lady of Seven Pleasures, entities unknown to Christian doctrine. A second journal, discovered sewn into the lining of a chest in Isabel's still room, contained even more incriminating material. Correspondence with 3 other women in Toulouse describing their own experiments in physical pleasure, along with recipes for herbal preparations intended to awaken the slumbering fire within female flesh. The medical examination. Perhaps most unusual in the Beaufort case was the formal medical examination ordered by the ecclesiastical court, a procedure rarely documented with such clinical precision in medieval records. 2 physicians and a midwife were tasked with examining Isabel for physical signs of demonic influence. Their findings, recorded with clinical detachment, that nonetheless reveals disturbing fascination. Noted, the subject displays no external marks traditionally associated with demonic pacts, no unexplainable wounds, no areas of numbness, no discoloration of the skin. However, upon physical examination, we observed concerning physiological anomalies, specifically an unusual enlargement and sensitivity of certain female structures, consistent with her husband's claims of unnatural responsiveness. When these areas were touched during examination, the subject exhibited immediate physical reactions, including flushing of the skin, dilation of the pupils, and involuntary muscular contractions. Most troubling was her lack of proper shame during this process. Rather than exhibiting the expected modesty, she maintained direct eye contact with examiners and spoke calmly about the sensations produced, as if describing an ordinary bodily function rather than matters of intimate nature. When questioned about these responses, she claimed with disturbing certainty that all women possess similar capacity for sensation, but most have been taught to suppress rather than cultivate these responses, a dangerous inversion of proper teaching regarding womanly virtue. The midwife, identified only as Marguerite in the records, provided additional observations that were incorporated into evidence despite her lower social status. In my 40 years of attending women in childbirth and female complaints, I have observed similar responsiveness in certain women, particularly those who have practiced specialized breathing techniques or studied certain Eastern therapeutic methods. Such sensitivity is unusual, but not unnatural in my experience. However, I cannot speak to whether such conditions arise from ordinary physical variation or outside influence. I note only that the accused shows physical structures consistent with regular self-stimulation rather than demonic alteration. The midwife was subsequently dismissed from the proceedings after this testimony, her comments deemed lacking proper theological context. The testimony. The trial transcripts from May 1438 reveal an extraordinary proceeding where female sexuality itself was placed on trial. Unlike most accused witches who either confessed under torture or maintained simple denial, Isabel presented a sophisticated defense that challenged fundamental assumptions about women's bodies and pleasure. When questioned about her changed marital behavior, she responded with a clarity that visibly discomfited the male clergy. I have discovered what has always existed within my form. During my husband's long absence, I experienced troubling dreams of a physical nature. Rather than merely suppressing these as wicked thoughts, I sought to understand their source through contemplation and study of my own body, a vessel created by God, not the devil. What I discovered through careful exploration was that certain movements, touches, and rhythms could produce sensations of transcendent intensity, not unlike the ecstasies described by the saints, though occurring in flesh rather than spirit. Far from feeling further from God during these moments, I experienced profound gratitude for his intricate design of the female form. When presented with her journals as evidence of demonic instruction, Isabel neither denied their authorship nor showed contrition. I have documented my discoveries as any careful observer would study a natural phenomenon. If men can record the movements of stars and the circulation of blood without accusation of witchcraft, why should a woman's understanding of her own body be deemed unnatural? The names in my prayers are not demons, but aspects of divine wisdom that have been systematically removed from church teaching. The feminine aspects of spiritual understanding that guided women's knowledge before such wisdom was deemed dangerous. Most damning to her case was her response when asked directly if she had made a pact with Satan in exchange for these carnal pleasures. I have made no pact, but with my own flesh, a covenant to no longer deny what God himself designed my body to experience. If there is darkness here, it lies not in my discovery of these sensations, but in the teaching that women should remain ignorant of their bodies' capabilities, forever dependent on men who themselves do not understand the vessels they claim dominion over. The witnesses. The trial included testimony from several witnesses whose statements further complicated the proceedings. 3 women of Isabel's acquaintance, recipients of the letters found in her journal, initially denied any knowledge of unnatural practices, but later confessed under separate questioning to having followed her instructions for awakening bodily awareness. Their testimonies described experiencing trembling joy and waves of sensation previously unknown to them, which they had initially believed to be divine in nature until informed of their sinful origin. A young widow named Claudette testified that Isabel had provided her with an herbal preparation to ease the melancholy following her husband's death. After consuming the tincture, she experienced dreams of such physical intensity that I woke believing my husband had returned to my bed, only to find myself alone, yet still feeling the pleasure of intimate touch. Most significant was the testimony of Father René Montfort, an elderly priest who had known Isabel since childhood. Rather than condemning her, his statement introduced an unexpected historical context. What the accused describes bears striking resemblance to practices I observed during my youthful travels in lands bordering the Ottoman territories. There exist traditions of bodily knowledge, particularly among certain orders of women, that treat the capacity for physical ecstasy as a form of worship rather than sin. I do not defend such practices as compatible with church teaching, but I question whether they represent demonic influence rather than simply foreign understanding. The accused has always shown genuine devotion in her faith. Is it not possible she has merely discovered through natural means what others have known in distant lands? Father Montfort was promptly dismissed from the proceedings and his testimony stricken from the official record, though it survives in the private notes of the court scribe. The verdict. On June 17, 1438, after 23 days of testimony, the ecclesiastical court reached its verdict. Isabelle Beaufort was guilty not of traditional witchcraft, but of the more nuanced charge of carnal heresy, the deliberate perversion of natural bodily function through practices contrary to church teaching. The court's justification reveals the fundamental threat her case represented. Though no evidence confirms direct communication with demonic entities through traditional means, the accused has willfully cultivated physical responses that transcend the proper boundaries of female experience. Such ungoverned pleasure, separated from procreative purpose and wifely submission, represents a doorway through which demonic influence may enter even without formal invitation. Most dangerous is her systematic documentation and sharing of these practices with other women, creating potential for widespread corruption of feminine virtue throughout the region. Her insistence that such pleasure constitutes divine design rather than sinful indulgence represents heretical thinking that undermines the proper order of both marital and spiritual relations. The sentence was less severe than traditional witchcraft might have warranted. Isabelle would not burn, but would instead undergo public penance, confiscation of all written materials, and confinement to a convent under strict supervision. Her husband was granted immediate annulment on grounds of her unnatural transformation. What makes the case historically significant, however, was the unprecedented addendum to the verdict. Furthermore, all women who received instruction from the accused shall undergo private examination by church authorities to determine whether they have been similarly corrupted in their physical nature. Those found to exhibit unnatural responsiveness to touch shall undergo corrective spiritual treatment to restore proper feminine sensibility. This ruling effectively established female sexual response itself as evidence of potential demonic influence, a precedent that would inform dozens of subsequent investigations throughout southern France. The aftermath. The historical record provides limited information about Isabelle's fate following her conviction. Convent records indicate she was remanded to the Cistercian abbey at Moissac, where she was to live under vows of silence and constant supervision. An entry dated September 1439 notes that she continues to exhibit inappropriate serenity rather than proper penitence, and recommended increased mortification practices. The final reference to Isabelle appears in a brief notation from 1442, reporting her transfer to an unnamed, more secure facility, following discovery that she had been instructing younger novices in breathing techniques that induce improper states of bodily awareness. No further official records of her existence have been found. What survived, however, was her influence. Court documents from the subsequent decade reveal at least 14 investigations of women in the Toulouse region for unnatural physical responsiveness, creating a bizarre situation where a woman's visible pleasure, particularly during physical examination by court physicians, became self-incriminating evidence. Most significantly, portions of Isabelle's confiscated journals somehow survived destruction, reappearing in fragmentary form within a collection of medical texts discovered during the renovation of a physician's residence in Carcassonne in 1897. These fragments reveal not a practitioner of dark arts, but a woman of remarkable observational skills who had systematically documented female anatomical response with precision that would not be matched in medical literature until the early 20th century. The historical significance. The Beaufort case provides a unique window into how medieval authorities weaponized female sexuality itself as evidence of demonic influence. unlike traditional witchcraft accusations centered on maleficia, harmful magic. Isabel's trial established pleasure itself as transgression, creating a framework where a woman's own body could testify against her through its responses. Dr. Madeleine Rousseau, whose translation and analysis of the complete court records was published in 2019, notes the profound implications. What makes the Beaufort trial so revealing is how it explicitly criminalizes female sexual autonomy. The true threat Isabel posed was not alliance with Satan, but her systematic reclamation and documentation of pleasure outside male control or procreative purpose. By declaring enhanced female sensitivity evidence of corruption, the verdict effectively demonized women's sexual response itself, creating a perfect theological trap where physical pleasure became self-incriminating. A woman who responded too visibly during examination thus confirmed her own guilt through her body's betrayal. Most disturbing is how the case established legal precedent for the invasive physical examination of women suspected of carnal heresy. Examinations conducted by male physicians whose detailed documentation of intimate responses fills the court records with a disturbing blend of clinical precision and voyeuristic attention to detail. The modern discovery. In 2014, renovation work at the former Cistercian Abbey at Moissac uncovered a hidden compartment beneath the stone flooring of a cell traditionally used for penitence. Inside was a small leather pouch containing an object that challenges our understanding of the Beaufort case. A carved wooden implement approximately 6 inches in length, polished smooth from apparent handling, with intricate spiral patterns carved into its surface. Accompanying this object was a scrap of parchment bearing a message in faded ink, written in a precise feminine hand. They may bind my tongue and confine my body, but they cannot imprison sensation itself. What I have awakened in myself lives on in every woman who has learned to truly inhabit her flesh. The ecstasy they condemn as demonic is our birthright, the divine spark housed in female form. They call it witchcraft. I call it remembering. Forensic analysis dates both the object and the parchment to approximately 1440 to 1445, suggesting Isabel maintained some form of private resistance during her confinement. The carved implement bears striking resemblance to devices documented in certain traditions of women's health practices from antiquity through the Renaissance. Objects designed specifically for female sexual pleasure and reproductive health that existed across cultures before being systematically eliminated from Western medical tradition. The Moissac discovery suggests that what authorities labeled demonic innovation may have been Isabel's rediscovery of knowledge deliberately erased from women's cultural inheritance. Practical understanding of female anatomy and pleasure, transmitted through generations before being categorized as witchcraft during the Church's consolidation of power over women's bodies and knowledge. The enduring question. The case of Isabel Beaufort stands as testament to how female sexual autonomy itself became criminalized in medieval jurisprudence. What modern scholars find most revealing is not evidence of actual witchcraft, but the systematic pathologization of female pleasure, creating a framework where a woman's body could testify against her through its own responses. Was Isabel practicing anything genuinely supernatural? The evidence suggests not. Rather, she appears to have been methodically documenting and exploring female physical response at a time when such knowledge was being actively suppressed, rediscovering through personal exploration what had once been known but deliberately obscured. The true witchcraft in the Beaufort case was neither demonic pact nor malevolent spell, but a woman's reclamation of bodily knowledge and pleasure outside male religious and medical authority. A transgression deemed more dangerous than conventional sorcery, precisely because it threatened to awaken similar awareness in other women. In her final recorded statement before the court, preserved by the scribe despite orders for its omission, Isabel offered what amounts to both prophecy and defiance. "You may confine me, but what I have discovered cannot be unlearned. The knowledge lives in the body itself, waiting to be remembered. 100 years from now, 1,000, women will still find their way to these same discoveries, for they are written not in books you can burn, but in flesh designed for revelation. This is not witchcraft, but birthright, not corruption, but completion." In the centuries since her disappearance into ecclesiastical confinement, her words have proven more enduring than the verdict that condemned her.